We're going to discuss the 11 o'clock hour in this hour, and then we're going to come back to the website building in the labs starting at probably around 2:15. We're going to end up cutting short a little bit. We're going to combine a little bit of the 11 o'clock hour and the question about landing a job when you graduate. We're going to combine a little bit of those now and talk through this. One of the things that you should be thinking about as a preacher and as a student specifically is what can you present by way of skills to a congregation? Because ultimately, when you get out of the school of preaching, if you're going to preach full-time, you are going to have to get a job. You are going to have to apply and talk to a congregation and present to them your background, your history, your skills, and the things that you may know, may not know. And during the course of that interview process, one of the things that you will most likely have to send them is a resume, right? Anyone who's ever gotten a job before knows writing resumes is fun. No, it's not. But here's what a lot of people in the world are coming to realize. That is, a lot of people who are in the job of hiring people. Resumes aren't very useful to understand what a person actually can do or has done. In the technology world, an individual was talking concerning this problem. He's been in charge of hiring and things in an organization before, and one of the things he always found a struggle was in the technology world, we use a lot of what are called certifications. So if you've used Cisco hardware and you were in a business that operated and supported Cisco hardware, you may have gotten a certification to do XYZ with Cisco hardware. All right? Microsoft runs certifications for Office and for Azure, all those different products. But in the job of hiring, as an individual who's trying to find the right person for a business, he would get applications that said, I'm certified in this, I'm certified in this, I'm certified in this. And then you hire someone, and while they may have been certified in the past or they may have an active certification, what you found after you hired them is they actually know nothing about it and they can't do that because they never did it for real. They did it to get a certification, but they didn't do it for a job. And so while they're certified, they're not actually skilled. One of the things that a congregation wants is not just someone who's graduated from a school of preaching, but someone who knows the Bible. So you can say, I'm a graduate of MSOP. And hopefully you get to that point. Get all the way through school and do graduate. But it's one thing to be able to present to them, I'm a graduate. It's another thing to be able to present to them, I am a graduate, and here's an idea of the things that I've learned and how I've studied. You could do that in a meeting with them, but the reality is, in those meetings, you're going to have a lot of different things to discuss as you're trying to talk to the eldership about a job, and that could just get very tedious very quickly. What you would love to be able to do is to present to them, here are things I know, here are things I've studied, here's a presentation of myself before you ever walk in the door, before you ever get into a meeting. Almost at the same time that you present to them a resume, which you probably mailed to them. For elderships who have hired preachers before, if they put out there somewhere online that they're looking for a preacher, they'll start getting mail. And with that mail may come, a preacher's resume, maybe an audio CD, maybe a DVD of them preaching. Well, that may be the best sermon they ever presented, maybe the worst sermon they ever presented. Hopefully they didn't send the worst, but you get a little glimpse of what they know. But you're in a time in your life as a student in the School of Preaching where you are working on developing knowledge, but you are also required to take that knowledge and that information and write it out, i.e. it's called papers, sermon outlines, And then in additional points in time, you in chapel get the opportunity to preach, present that material. You get the opportunity to preach in locations filling in for individuals, or maybe you have a full-time responsibility at some point in school to preach, to teach, to do Bible classes. And a website is a way you can take all that information and present it to a visitor to that website, right? We've been talking through that. We've set up areas for class assignments, for sermon outlines, etc. But think about this. What if, when you're graduating and you're looking for a preaching job, instead of just sending them a resume, you could also send them a link to your website where it's not one sermon outline, it's not one sermon video, it's not one article, it's 2 years worth, where you're showing and demonstrating not only your knowledge as they read through some of those papers that you've written. They read through some of those articles that you've written. You're demonstrating knowledge, but you're also demonstrating a capability to teach someone else. Part of the reason for this whole course is because out in the world of having a preaching job, out in the world of doing preaching for a living, or evangelizing with a congregation for a living, or serving as a minister for a living, you need skills, not just a graduation paper that says you did something. And when a congregation is looking for a preacher, they're looking for someone who has skills, not just a claim to have graduated from somewhere. One of the ways that you present that, one of the ways you can present that, is if you go through this process, taking those assignments, continuing to make those assignments, but continuing to post them on the website for 2 years, because when you're done, now you send not only a picture of what you have accomplished by way of a word I'm looking for, diploma. There's the word I'm looking for. A degree or a diploma. You're not just sending, hey, I have a diploma from here. You're also sending, here's a picture into who I am. Here's a picture into what I've learned. Here's a picture into the skills that I have. You're presenting them a picture of your ability to work and not just what you claim to be. Okay? That's the short summary version of the 2 o'clock hour. One of the ways you take a website and you use it to help land a job is you spend the time while you're here, where you already were required to do a lot of it. But what if a teacher comes up and says, you know what, I don't know about this website thing, maybe you want to do it or not, it's optional to you whether or not you take your assignments from this class and you put them on the website. A teacher may make it optional, but you think about it. What if you go, it may be optional whether or not I do it, but I'm looking at the future. I'm looking at where I want to go. I'm looking at what I want to do. And I want to spend the few minutes of extra time, take those articles, take those assignments, take those things that I've written, and put them on the website. Because just because something's not mandatory doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. We look at the opportunities that we have. I discussed earlier, I think it was yesterday, what one of the directors, or the director of the School of Preaching where I attended at Tri-Cities, told us, if you're given an opportunity, if you're given an opportunity to speak on a radio program, take it. If you're given an opportunity to speak on a television program, take it. If you're given an opportunity to speak in a gospel meeting or in a seminar, take it. Because you're developing your skills, you're developing your abilities. As you do those things 1 or 2 times, you become comfortable with doing them, and you can do them more. You're developing your ability to serve. And here's where all of this comes back to. It doesn't come down to, you know what, I'm really proud of me. It's not about that. It doesn't come back to, look at how much I can do. It's not about that. It comes down to this: how can I best serve the kingdom of my Lord? And as we develop skills, As we push the boundaries of what we can do, we become more useful in the kingdom. And brethren, we need men who are challenging themselves to become more useful in the kingdom. Local work is important. But worldwide, the church globally, we need skilled workers. We need skilled missionaries. One of the individuals who was here earlier, they just had to leave, Sal and Barbara Joseph. He's a graduate from here. He's just now getting on board with a lot of the technology. He's trying to learn this. They're back over here from Africa. 2 days, but he said, I want to be there. I want to be in class. I want to learn how to do this because we need this. You're given a golden opportunity here. You need to use it. Now, as you look at your life going forward, as you begin to think, what am I going to do as a preacher? What am I going to spend my time on? How am I going to work? What areas am I going to work in? Let me encourage you to have this attitude. No matter what it is that you're doing, no matter what area you're working with, maybe you're working with youth, maybe you're working with older folks, maybe you're working generally in a congregation and you're one of the few individuals working there, challenge yourself to keep developing. We live in a society and we live in a world that has realized it's not enough to just know what you knew when you graduated from school. In the business world, it is commonplace now that most employees are having to go through a retraining or a relearning process every 18 months to stay current with their job. And those that don't, after about 10 years, if they ever get let go from the current job, they won't be able to find another one. Why? Because they didn't continue to stay current. They didn't continue to develop their skills. If you work in any occupation or any job that has the need for continual certification, you work in the healthcare industry, you will have to go through a continual re-education process because you will continue to have to stay certified in certain things. If you are a lawyer and you work in areas of the law, every year or two you have to go through a process to become recertified to do certain things to keep your law license. Why? Because we recognize the need for ongoing learning. So here's the disappointing fact. When you get out of school, you're not done with school. Because you've chosen to be a preacher. And when you get in that study or you get in that office at that congregation after you first get a job, your job is not to sit around and do nothing. And I know you've been told this over and over again. But I encourage you, beyond just studying the Bible generally, also look for additional skills in teaching people, in ways to teach people, and begin developing those skills. Begin learning. You say, you know what, that's great, Aaron, but I'm going to have a lot to do. Yes, you are. My challenge to you is this. Get 20 or 30 minutes every day. Carve it out and use it exclusively for building new skills. If you've done what you should do while you're in school, starting at this point forward till the time you graduate, even you second-year students, if you take this website and you continue to spend 20 to 30 minutes each day on it, you will have had this one down. That you'll be able to build websites and do things like that without even thinking about it by the time you graduate. But look for things that develop your skills. Look for things that develop your speaking skills. And spend a month, 30 minutes a day, developing your speaking skills. At the end of a month, if you spend 30 minutes a day doing it, you'll be amazed how much better you speak 1 month later than you did a month before that. Why? Because you took the initiative, you set a goal, and you spent 30 minutes every day developing a skill. You don't have to be the best at everything to be skilled at that thing. Here's an example. I know how to edit audio. but I could never make a living doing it. But what I've done is I've taken a little bit of time over a long time, over a couple of years, learning how to do that well, just in short snippets. I've edited my sermons. I've gone through and I've learned enough, but every time I find a new thing that I can learn how to do, I keep adding on. As you take another new piece and another new piece and another new piece to a skill and you add on, you become a more developed individual at doing that thing. You say, Aaron, what you're saying, it's very generic. I'm not sure I get the value of it. Raise your hand if you know who Garland Elkins is. Did Garland Elkins memorize all of the passages he could quote in 6 months? 1 year? 10 years? Robert Taylor. Raise your hand if you know who he is. All the passages he can quote, do you know he still goes back and rememorizes those passages again? He goes back to it and he does it again and he does it again and he does it again to keep building that skill. Because he finds the value in hiding God's word in his heart that he might not sin against him. We need to be those who recognize that as preachers, we have chosen a life of continual development. For the individual who wants to become a preacher and then be done and just do the work, you're in for a rude awakening. Because the work is a constant learning. It's a constant skill building. But you say, well, that's all right. I don't plan on preaching full time. I plan on working with small congregation and being employed full time. Guess what? The only thing that you've decided is that now you're going to do two things and still be constantly learning. The reality is this. Skill development is crucial to a preacher. And every time you step outside your comfort zone to do something new, you begin the process of building additional skills. We need to be those who understand the value of growing, of studying. Oh, wait a minute. Open your Bibles. You thought I'd forgotten about those, didn't you? Someone quote to me 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16.
All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness.
Verse 17. I was pointing at him. All Scripture is given for a purpose. That the man of God may be, what was that word? Perfect. Now somebody tell me what it means. Complete. Mature. How do you grow to maturity? All in one day or a little bit at a time? 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. What does it say in the ASV? Give diligence. Study to show thyself approved unto God. A workman, a workman. An individual who's established and continues in a work. An individual who gives diligence, who puts forth effort, who strives daily to grow as a Christian. Now, which two of those passages, or which of those two passages applies to preachers? Both. Which two of those passages applies to elders? Which two of those passages applies to members? Which two of those passages applies to wives? None of us are excluded. Whether you preach for a living or not, you're not excluded. But you need to understand that you don't get there in a day. When you get out and you get a job preaching, you're going to have days where you're going to think, I'm just not any good at this. Or you're going to become associated with someone else who's so much better than you at it that you're thinking, I just can't measure up. I'm never going to be that good. Don't think that way. I told you yesterday that I took martial arts when I was a teenager. One of the things that my instructor constantly reminded us of and constantly reminded all of his students of is this. Quite often, the one who starts off trying to learn how to do something like martial arts and is the worst at it becomes the best at it. Because the one who walks into the martial arts studio and begins learning and they have a natural talent at doing it doesn't work as hard. If you have a natural talent at memorization and your memorization takes 1/5 of the time that another student's takes, maybe you should be doing 5 times more. Don't work less hard because it's easy for you. But those to whom it is hard strive harder. They have to push through more obstacles. They have to overcome more barriers. And did you realize that you don't grow by doing something and it being easy? If you get up and you stand in front of an audience and you just have a natural ability to speak, you may be tempted to not develop that ability to speak. But if you get up in front of an audience and you are there and you're stumbling over your words and you can't think of what to say next and you look at your notes and you're lost all the time, you are not a failure at preaching. You have to keep developing. So when we find something that's hard, when we find something that's difficult, we don't give up. We keep developing. We keep growing. We keep working. We push hard. Why do we push hard? Why do we overcome failure? Because it helps us grow. You say, Aaron, that's just your opinion. No, it's not. Turn to James chapter 1. James chapter 1, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. My brethren, count it all joy. You stand up behind a pulpit, you stand up in front of an audience, and you struggle to speak. You struggle to say words. You struggle to follow yourself along in your notes, and you're thinking, I can't do this. James says, count it all joy. When you get down from presenting that lesson and you think, I'm just not worth anything, I need to quit. I need to go back to pushing a broom. I need to go back to a job in some other form. I need to get out from in front of people. When you go and you do a Bible study with someone, as Aaron was describing earlier, and you sit down with them and you just can't get it all wrapped up together, and they decide to not study with you anymore, and you go, I'm just not going to do this Bible study thing. Count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. Someone from the context, tell me what that means. Difficulties, struggles. Here, temptations, true or false? Temptations in this passage means temptation to sin. False, does not. Go down to verses 12 through 15, you'll find temptations to sin. That's that context. That's not this context. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, difficulties, knowing this, that the trying of your faith works patience. But let this patience, this bearing up under, this continual struggle, this development to carry a load, have her perfect work. Did you know that there's a woman out there who's working on you? And I'm not talking about your wife if you're married. And I'm not talking about your mother if you were a son of a mother. I think you probably were. There's a woman out there working on you. She's trying to get you to be better. She's patience. If we go back to the context of the book of Proverbs, she's also wisdom. And she's crying out to you. She's crying out to you to strive harder to develop in service to the Lord. She's crying out to you to be wise and to understand how to do things in a right way. She's crying out to you, wanting you to learn the truth and then teach others. Let patience have her perfect work. Get out of the way. When you doubt yourself, when you say, I can't do this, when you get in your mind and you say, I can't preach, I can't do personal Bible studies, I can't do personal work, I can't door knock, I can't do Instagram, I can't do Facebook, you will tell yourself 1,000 times a year, I can't, and you need to remember that patience is still doing her work. Teach my boys. But you don't say, I can't. You might say, I haven't yet learned. But there's a difference. One is you telling yourself you have a barrier that God has put on top of you. God has limited your abilities. Now raise your hand if you believe that God has limited your abilities, or if you actually just believe you haven't actually developed those abilities. I don't think any of us would put our hands up. Now, He's limited our abilities to do miracles, yes. We don't fall in that category. But He hasn't limited your abilities to develop yourself and grow. As a matter of fact, He's called you to it. He's demanded that you do it. And He keeps placing struggles in front of you to make you do it. True or false? God told Abraham to go to the land that would become his inheritance, and when he got there, he received the land. True or false? False. 5 years after he got there, he received the land. 25 years after he got there, he received the land. Isaac received the land. Jacob received the land. Do you see where we're going with this? God said, I'm going to lead you to a place that you don't know. And it wasn't until after he got there, he told him, and you're never going to own this land. But what did God tell him? About His commandments. And about if you will be obedient to me. What did God tell Abraham? Turn to Genesis. We'll read it from where God says the same thing to Isaac. Genesis chapter 26. Isaac is in the land. Abraham is now dead, but God reiterates His promise to Abraham to Isaac. Genesis chapter 26, verse 2, and the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries. And I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries. And in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws, and Isaac dwelt in Gerar. God tells Isaac, I have given to Abraham this land, even though Abraham's dead and never received the land. Isaac, I will give it to you, even though Isaac will die and will never receive the land. But what he does say is, if you continue to keep my commandments. If you continue to keep my charge, if you continue to keep my statutes and my laws, then you and your descendants will receive this. There's this process as Christians where we don't look to the now to see what we get in the end. We look beyond now. You say, okay, well, yeah, we look to the future. No. We look beyond now. In Hebrews chapter 11, we're told that Abraham saw the city he would dwell in. But what city did he see? A city whose builder is God. Did he see Jerusalem in David's day? No. He saw a city that wasn't part of this life, that wasn't part of this earth. He saw a city whose builder and maker is God. He saw a dwelling place with the Father. And that's what he strove toward. Can you go to heaven and not be the best preacher who's ever walked the earth? Can you go to heaven and be the worst preacher that's ever walked the earth? No. But are you the worst preacher that's ever walked the earth? No. For that, you'd actually have to be a liar. Because the worst preacher that's ever walked the earth is a liar. So you're not the worst preacher that's ever walked the earth. And you're not the worst preacher that's ever stood behind a pulpit. So if you compare yourself to someone better than you, make it a motivation for growth. But if you think you're the worst who's ever stood behind a pulpit, no, you're not. Because Satan and his angels have stood behind pulpits. And they've lied. You're not the worst. You may be somewhere in the middle. That just means you're called to grow. You're called to give diligence. And when you're the age of Roger, you better still be giving diligence. You better still be growing. You better still be looking for opportunities to learn. You better still be deciding you will do more. You will do better. Amen. There's a man sitting in this classroom this afternoon who knows a lot more than you. He can speak better than you. He can present sermons that you haven't yet dreamed of. Yet he's been sitting in this classroom with you learning how to build a website. Because he values learning. He values developing skills and abilities. That's why he's learning with you. Someone finished the phrase, humble yourselves. And he will lift you up. Turn to James chapter 4. That's verse 10. Right before then, verse 7. Submit yourselves therefore to God. When you get into this life and when you get into this career as a preacher, when you get into this time ministering in a full-time capacity and you send off a resume and you never hear anything back. And you send off another resume and you never hear anything back. And then you finally hear back from the third or the fourth one and you go and you present a lesson and they interview you and you go home and you wait 3 weeks and you haven't heard anything back. And then you go another 2 weeks and you still haven't heard anything back. Or you do hear back, sorry, we picked somebody else. Don't give up. Don't quit. Do this. Submit yourself to God and humble yourself in the sight of the Lord. And continue to work. 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. One of my favorite chapters in all of Scripture, though the folks who attend the college will know I say that a lot. I've got a lot of favorites. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 55. Oh, death, where is your sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. Paul writes to this congregation, and he quotes these Old Testament scriptures. He quotes these things to remind them that sin is what holds them back. And the law is what holds them guilty. But then he says, but thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in what? The work of the Lord. Paul doesn't say always be involved in it. Paul doesn't write to these brethren and say always be considering. He also doesn't say make sure you show up on Sunday. He doesn't say make sure you attend every worship assembly. He doesn't say make sure you're at every night of the gospel meeting. He says abound in the work of the Lord. Not a small effort, is it? It's a giant effort. It's a continual effort. When you abound in something, you give yourself to the work. And then, over time, maybe when this life is over, you end up just like Abraham, finally receiving the reward. Do you know that in this life, you should never preach for money? You say, well, wait a minute, Aaron. I got to feed my family. I didn't say you should never be paid for preaching. I said you should never preach for money. You should always preach for a reward, though. You should always preach for a reward of being faithful to the Lord and serving Him until this life is over. The difference is clear. Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul, an apostle of Jesus. That's chapter 1. Let me go to chapter 4. Charge thee, therefore, before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at His appearing and His kingdom, preach the word. Be instant in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. No question for you. When the time comes where they won't endure sound doctrine, what do you think happens to the pay of the preacher who doesn't preach what tickles the ears?
Goes down.
It might go down, it might go away. Never preach for money. Preach for a reward in heaven. Go down to verse 6. For I am ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which is not for me only, for all them who love the Lord's appearing. When you understand in your work, in your ministry, that you don't preach for the approval of others. You don't preach for the rewards of money. You don't preach because of how much you get paid or don't get paid, or where you live or where you don't live, or who you're around or who you're not around. You preach because there's someone who is lost. And every other skill you develop during your time in school, you develop because there's someone who is lost. And we don't always learn from the best preacher who's ever walked the face of the earth. We don't always get to sit at the pulpit or at the foot of the individual who's been preaching for 50 years and has developed all those skills. Sometimes we sit in front of a person who's been doing it for 2 years. But if you've only been doing it for 2 years, by all means, you better have been putting diligence into those 2 years. Some of you, if you're anything like every other class that's ever come through this school, some of you are doing just enough to get by. And I don't have a clue who any of you are. But you do. When you do just enough to get by, you're not abounding in the work of the Lord. Because guess what? Your grades don't reflect your spirituality. Your grades don't reflect your skills or your knowledge or your effort. But God knows what you do. And God knows if you don't give diligence. Now, let's talk about some things in the next few minutes before we take a break and we come back. Let's talk about some things that are capabilities of the internet and of websites that I want you to be thinking about where this can go. I mentioned yesterday that I create, use the right computer here, I create a daily devotional. You go to, on your computers right there, Cozort.org. That is not Cozort.org. Hold on just a minute. I broke something. I tell you what, go to ColliervilleCoc.org. And you are invited to a gospel meeting. See, I can segue into a gospel meeting invitation anytime. This daily devotional right here, your daily admonition. So it's a video that I do. It's a minute a day. It's a daily devotional. People get it in their mail, or email, in podcast, in YouTube. They're subscribed on YouTube. It's just 1 minute, it's short, something to get their day started, something to get them thinking about God's Word. But the power of the internet and the power of technology is that I can do this at a scale I could never have done it 5 years ago. And this is why we need people developing skills. This is also not something I just was born knowing how to do. I built on this. A year ago when I started it, I didn't know all the pieces I needed to do. I built on it a little bit at a time. But let me show you a service that we're going to introduce you to before we're done in the next hour. It's called Zapier. Z-A-P-I-E-R. Zapier.com. I'm going to log in real quickly just to give you an idea of what goes on here. Zapier is a connector. It's a connector that is intended to connect one service online or one thing to something else. So, you write a letter. I know most of you have not done that. You sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and you write a letter. And then you take that letter and put it in an envelope and you put a name on it, and you put a stamp on it, and you seal it, and you put it in the mailbox. How does it get where it's going? The Postal Service. They're the connector between you and the recipient. That's what Zapier does. It doesn't send mail, it doesn't drive trucks, it connects two things. You put something in the right place, and it ends up somewhere else. So here's an example of something. Let me zoom in so you can actually see this here. Here's an example of what we do at Collierville. Every week at Collierville, we post our church bulletin on our website. The secretary prepares the bulletin and sends it out in an email to the members. And then I post it on the website. Say, Aaron, how much time does that take you? I do it from my phone, and it takes me about 30 seconds. Okay, well, do you create a post? Yes. Do you tag the category that belongs to and make sure it goes to the bulletins page? Yes. Do you include an image with it? Yes. Do you attach the PDF? Yes. How long does it take you? 30 seconds. Here's why. I use Dropbox, similar to Google Drive, similar to OneDrive,
similar to iCloud. All those things, you're familiar with one of them most likely. But in Dropbox, I have a folder. But you'll notice here on Zapier, it has a trigger. That's like your mailbox. At your mailbox, most likely, maybe not here at school, but when you were growing up, you had a flag, right? What was the flag for?
Tell the postal service you have mail.
To tell the Postal Service you had mail that was outgoing. Because you might not have had mail that was coming in, so they might have skipped your house, but the flag being up said, hey, something's here, you need to come get it. That's what a trigger does, exactly. So, we're going to start by noticing what's going on. When I take let me open this side by side. When I take a folder, or a file, I'm sorry, and in my Dropbox I have a folder that was right back there. Collierville COC. And inside that there's a folder called Bulletin. Every week when I get the email for the bulletin, attached as a PDF, I take that PDF on my phone and I save it into this folder. And that creates a trigger. It's the mailbox flag going up. Zapier sits and watches that folder inside Dropbox. And when a new file arrives, what it does is it uploads. Oh, by the way, we actually check in this, we check to see if it's PDF. Because Aaron might have accidentally put, a Word document in there. We don't want to put a Word document out on the website, we want to put a PDF out on the website. So we just double check ourselves. So, new file arrives in the folder. Zapier checks it to make sure that it is what it's supposed to be. And then it uploads it. It goes and connects out to my WordPress website and it uploads that file. But it not only uploads it, it also goes through a process. If I clicked on the wrong one. Scroll down. It goes through a process of taking the name of the file, file extension, the file itself, and putting it up on the website, and then creates a post. I don't create posts on the Collierville website. I do an advertisement for the gospel meeting. But every sermon outline, every sermon audio, every bulletin, every admonition episode that goes up on there, I don't touch. They happen automatically through Zapier. Be thinking about what you do. Be thinking about things that are, here's the key word, repetitive tasks. And be thinking about, can that task be automated? Sometimes the answer is no. But in the world of technology, a lot of times that answer is yes. So when it creates a post, here's what it does. First of all, it says, okay, I need a post. Then it says this is a bulletin, and it takes the date. She puts the date or the edition of that up there. So we just grab that out of the file name. We put it in a page, and you say, oh, that was complicated. It's really not, but we'll walk you through it here in a little bit. Publishes it, says the author is Aaron Kozer, just because that's the only user on the website. It tags it as a bulletin in the categories, puts the tag of bulletin on there, and it publishes it. Now let me walk you through something far more complicated than that. This is not for you to understand how to do this. This is for you to get a glimpse of what's possible online. I mentioned the admonition project that I do. Inside of that project, this being zoomed in this far is really throwing me off. There we go. I need to be able to see the side to side. Inside that project, I go through the process of creating the video and then publishing it to YouTube. I take it and I also publish it to Vimeo. I also go through and publish it to Facebook. I also send the file up to Amazon S3. We talked about that. That's a cloud storage system for large files. I also publish a post on Facebook. I also send out an email to all those who are subscribed to that service. I also go through and post it on the Collierville website and my website and 3 other churches' websites. Aaron, you must not have much work to do over at Collierville. You've got way too much time. That all happens when I drop a file in a folder. Inside this workflow, the trigger is in Google Drive. This time we're using Google Drive. Here's why. Google owns Google Drive and YouTube. And you can use Google Drive to upload files to YouTube, but you can't use any other storage service to do that. So we're using Google Drive. That's the only reason for that. Inside my Google Drive, there's a folder. Every time a video shows up in that folder, this process runs. First thing that I do is I pull the name out of it, and then I go check a spreadsheet, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. It's the magic of this entire process. Inside the spreadsheet, I have a file name, same thing that I named that particular video. And in that file name, I have the title of the episode, the number of the episode, a description of the episode, the tags that go up on the website for the episode and also go to YouTube. All that information is just in a row in the spreadsheet. It goes and finds that row, and then it uploads the file to Amazon S3. It's the first step. Goes and puts it up there so we can get the URL from it. It then goes, having taken it and gone up to S3, it uploads it to Vimeo. And then it uploads it to YouTube. And then it takes a little bit of a delay. Here's the reason for the delay. YouTube and Vimeo both take a little bit of time to process the video before they'll hand out the URL and the images. So, it's uploaded, it's sitting there, it's just waiting. It sits there and waits for 5 minutes while you're doing something else, because I've already usually gone to bed by this point. But it's doing this, and I'm not touching a thing. Then it takes the image from YouTube. So, with every video you upload on YouTube, what do you get? You get a thumbnail? Okay? Usually YouTube's algorithm finds something that's not moving, blurry, and it grabs some thumbnails. Same process works for my videos. Goes, and after the processing is done, now my processing is short, so the delay is only 5 minutes because the video is only 1 minute. So the amount of time the video takes longer to process. We're only using 5 minutes because short video, short process time. Goes and grabs that large file, or that the highest resolution image, and then it goes and puts it in a folder. It grabs that image, that screenshot. Having put it in a folder, it uploads the screenshot to Amazon S3. You say, Aaron, I'm confused. I don't understand how all this is working. What I want you to get is what computers can do when you take the time to string them together instead of doing everything yourself. By the way, it's also what congregations can do when you also have people help you instead of trying to do everything yourself. But that's another discussion for another time. It takes those, it uploads them to a service called Cloudinary. Cloudinary actually allows you to edit images without ever touching the images themselves. It automates that process. Transforms that so that it looks very different from when it originally went up. When it originally went up, let me see if I can find an example here. When it originally uploads the thumbnail, it looks something like this. Right? It's just a thumbnail from a video. When Cloudinary gets finished with it, it'll look something like this. I understand it was 2 different images, but it grabbed a new one. I didn't type the text. The computer typed the text. I didn't lay out the image. Computer did it. That's actually 4 images all compiled into one because the computer knows how to do it. And it happens on the fly. I can prove it happens on the fly. If I come over here and change the word ignored to heard, it happens on the fly. By the way, you shouldn't necessarily believe every image that you see. Because computers change things. Then it takes those images, before it does that, it also goes to Google Drive, finds a folder where it finds a transcript of the video, pulls the transcript, uploads the transcripts. Then it takes the image, uploads it to Collierville, creates a post on Collierville's website. Takes the image, uploads it to my website, creates a post on my website. Takes the image, uploads it to the Hurley Church of Christ website in Hurley, Mississippi, and creates a post on their site. Takes the image and uploads it to the Paintsville Church of Christ in Paintsville, Kentucky, and creates a post on their site. And then all of those things happen, and when the new post is created on my site, it triggers a second Zapier workflow to go send out the email and go make a post on Facebook. All of those things happen when I click or take the file, drop it in a folder, and go to bed. What I'm telling you is this. Not, you know what, I'll never be able to figure something that complicated out. But I learned how to do it a little bit at a time. I learned first how to take a file, put it in a folder, and then have that go create a post on WordPress. That seems pretty easy now, doesn't it? Compared to that. But then I took that one skill and I attached it to another skill. And I took that skill and I attached it to another one. But here's what that enables me to do. Things that I could never have the time to do otherwise. Be thinking over the break about things that you imagine you'll never have time to do. And most of those things can be automated. Think about the power that God's placed in your hands. Technology is incredibly powerful. And it should be used for good. And we need to start using it that way. We need to start doing what's incredibly complicated. But here's one thing that the world gets wrong. The world would say, you know what, if you're not being paid to do something, you shouldn't do it. That process right there, I could quite easily make a lot of money selling something complicated like that to a business. It'll teach you how to do it for free. If you'll teach it, if you'll use it to preach the gospel. Because my reward doesn't come financially. It comes in souls going to heaven. But here's what I do ask. If you learn how to do it, teach somebody else. Because there's not enough people doing hard and complicated things that require skills over the years to learn in the church. We need more people. That's the only reason I'm here teaching this seminar. We need more people. So you say, well, I just don't know that that technology stuff is for me. Let me help you for a few weeks. You just try. And when you run into an issue, you send me an email or you give me a call. In 6 weeks, you'll have changed your tune. Because you'll have not only a working website, but you'll have the ability to take things and put them on your website by dropping them in a folder. So when you get that assignment from Dan, hey, you need to write the paper and you need to make sure it goes on your student website. You will have written the paper and emailed it to Dan, I think, because he doesn't accept paper anymore, so you didn't actually even print it to get it to him. And you will have dropped it in a folder, and it will show up on your website. Because doing repetitive tasks that take time and aren't valuable isn't the way we should do things. By the way, every Saturday, Dan emails me his bulletin. And you want to know what I do with it? I drop it in a folder so it shows up on his website. We need to learn things that are valuable. And then we need to help the kingdom grow. Let's be dismissed for 10 minutes and come back and we'll work on the website some more. Hopefully you're motivated.